Loie Rawding, thanks for being here. And I've been really eager to talk with you about your book ever since I learned about it through you when you
Hmm.
joined MindWorks. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. I'm thrilled to be here. I love talking about all books, not just mine, but mine's fun too.
Yeah, I wanted to start off by something I read from the Acrostic Review.
Hmm.
They noted that your book, Tight Little Vocal Chords, is not a traditional or typical novel. It is a collection of stories, vignettes, lists, dialogues, letters, sequences, and voices. It is poetry through and through. And to that, I would also add some what appears to be Morse code in there as well.
Yep.
The one thing um, I really found, and I just wonder about reading your book, not the writing of it, but the reading of it.
Hmm.
It's really a demanding and challenging book to read in our post-literate society. And and in one of the letters to M, that is the postmodernist painter, Marsden Hartley, the writer says, "I'm no genius. I'll probably never figure this out." When I read that, it really allowed me to not be a genius and never completely figure out what is going on in this
Yeah,
book. Um, and so so for me, it's not a story, of course, that's told in any sort of linear way.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. But I think, what I set out to do when the idea first came to me and I encountered Marsden Hartley's paintings, which he's a Maine painter from the 1900s, early 20th century, and his life story was very interesting. But what struck me more was his work, right? Was his breadth of visual fields, not just painting landscapes in Maine, but also the male body. He goes all the way into abstract work, using symbols and large, bold brushstrokes. And that was my that was my inspiration. And rather than simply take his life and fictionalize it or write a more straightforward novel, I instead tried to put my language in conversation with those paintings. So that was my challenge. Was I didn't just want to write a sort of historical novel or semi-biographical novel. I wanted to explore what it would mean to experience his paintings for myself as a viewer or as a reader of paintings, and then translate that experience into the field of language, which is my art, right? And while I find painting to be fun, I'm no painter. Um, and so then the character of M is born, and using loosely Marsden Hartley's life story as well, I was able to sort of craft this sort of like other universe underneath a rock. One of my readers, took in the book and said, it felt like I was lifting up a rock and I thought that I would see bugs and dirt underneath the rock, but I didn't. I saw a whole new universe, and I had to let myself go into that universe in order to have any hope of surviving. And that's really, as hard as it is, that's really what I was going for, was a relatively disorienting experience where you have to let go of a little bit of the reaching for understanding that we always strive for, right? That have to figure this out. What is the intellectual goal of this experience? And instead to really just feel it with your body, the way one feels with poetry, right? Which is how I got started. I started in poetry. Never thought I would write a novel. This one is relatively short, but I still call it a novel. Um, and so it still is very lyric driven. It's very driven by image. It's very driven by sensory experience and embodiment. And my background as a dancer and an actor, it all is informed by my own experience, which is a very embodied artistic experience. So I acknowledge though, and have always acknowledged that it is intentionally difficult. It was written, it was made to sort of put a reader off kilter a little bit,
Mhm.
to make them uncomfortable. And I think it's a reading experience that we don't get very often, as you said, anymore.
Yeah, one thing and I hope I don't misquote you, but I think I read this somewhere that said you didn't really like uh, Marsden Hartley's work at
Yeah,
first, but you loved it.
yeah,
And it really struck me that that's all also goes on with this novel. I didn't know that I liked it so much,
yeah.
but
It's
was
fair.
really drawn to it. And I had to be drawn to it paragraph by paragraph or page by page.
Mhm.
Um, it's very much a graphic novel in text form, and to me, it's like wandering through a gallery, you know, where you go from gallery to gallery, painting to painting.
Mhm.
You go back to the gallery, maybe the painting that you're really drawn to that day. You know, I wandered around this novel. I didn't read
Great.
it straightforward way. I jumped
Yeah.
all over the place.
Well, it would exhaust you if you had tried to do that, I think. Even I,
Yeah.
even in writing it, took took my time, went from scene to scene. And again, perhaps a consequence of not being comfortable in longer prose form, right? But it's intended to, yeah, just read one little section and have that. If that's all you are able to experience as a reader, then that's fine. Line by line carries a lot of weight.
Yeah.
It carries a lot of image. It is very heavy in that sense, but a weight that I hope people find pleasure in, right? It's in a sense, a lot of my work and a lot of, interest in studying narrative medicine, for example, that I'm bringing into this is like how we negotiate not just pain, physical and emotional pain, but also pleasure. And at what point do those two things, work in concert with each other sometimes? And so even though it's a lot of work, even though it's taxing, you sort of have to take your time, pick and choose, where can we source the pleasure in that? And that's the sort of experiment that I'm working on myself when I write, and what I hope to challenge readers to do.
Yeah, that brought up a question for me is how do you like to read? And does your reading pattern parallel your writing style?
Yeah. Not at all. Isn't that weird? I have a hard time reading multiple books at a time, for example. I'm a pretty straightforward reader in that I tend to get overwhelmed if
Yeah.
I'm taking in too much language. Now, I don't feel that way about music or dance or theater or film. But there's something about the literary arts that I have to be pretty focused in order to fully absorb it. It's the opposite when I'm working, right? I have 4 different projects all at the same time. I'm writing in vignettes, I'm working on a poem, I'm trying to finish an essay, um, all of which have very different purposes or goals. But when I do read with intention, and I read slowly. And in that sense, I think it's what my book demands is time and patience,
Yeah.
which is the kind of reader I am. So, a little bit of everything.
It's a perfect narrative medicine book because
Oh, thank you.
no, seriously, first it's deceptively small but really dense, and so therefore I don't know if it's like looking under a rock. For me, it was like picking up a heavy rock
Yeah.
and then breaking it and seeing the different
Cool.
minerals and everything that were in
Yeah.
there. And also, you really reminded me of what is the function of creating art and consuming it? And the story, again, we come to know the main character of M, um, and we're not sure who the narrator is. Uh,
Hmm.
that always remains a mystery. And
Yep.
so one of the devices of the novel is the letters to M is signed yours truly,
Mm-hmm.
never signed at the end. And we get a sense of a relationship that is either real or imagined. It's filled with pain, sex, sadness, memory, longing, escape, all these elements. And
Mm-hmm.
but in some of the letters, it's what I wrote down some quotes. I'm using you to understand myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to make sense of my own memory. I write through you to understand memories. And
Yeah.
what do you think about that? Is that was that
I think that the epistolary sections, which appear kind of throughout, right, are as close to me as the author as we get.
yeah,
Now, again, as a fiction writer, and something that I've talked about with other narrative medicine folks is like, this is not my story. These are not my memories verbatim, right? I'm not crafting personal essay, but the voice of those letters is, in a sense, me acknowledging my presence in the work as the author, as the crafter of all of this. And those questions, like the quote you just read, those are true statements. I'm trying to understand myself. I'm trying to explore these questions that are plaguing me, as I age and experience life and think back to my memories. And this is my vehicle. This
yeah.
is what I have at my fingertips, and it's the way that I help, sort of understand my world. And I think it's important, not that all writers have to do this, but there's a level of consciousness that is required of us as artists where we can acknowledge our presence in the work to some degree, I believe, because we're responsible for it.
Yeah, right. You created it, and the the author, that is you, kind of dissolve into the work, and so it's hard to distinguish fact from memory from fantasy, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's it really, for me, it just brings up what I learned through the narrative medicine process. It's really interesting. I was an English major. I don't think I ever learned to really read, uh, because we were always studying about, here is the piece. What does it have to do with the period in which it was written? We were always trying to intellectually understand not only the piece but also the author. And I think in narrative medicine, the shift is read and resonate for yourselves. Try to understand what this is doing to you. And then we go deeper into the writing that comes from consuming the art. And so it's a really nice um, kind of creative push to,
Yeah.
which has really influenced now how I read just about anything, or how I look at paintings. I was wandering through the Met yesterday,
Wonderful.
thinking, what is this? What are these paintings doing to me? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
what and I noted, like, what do I keep coming back to? What
Mm-hmm.
paintings? So it really has that kind of gallery like type experience, for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think narrative medicine has been it's so fascinating for me to delve deeper into, because it is sort of the reverse of what is a creative writing education, right? So like, start with me as the writer, and I will be workshopped. My work will be workshopped for the purposes of making it a better piece of creative writing of art. So it's still very me focused,
Right.
but with the opposite intention, right? The intention of narrative medicine, as I see it, right, is to help us understand each other, not necessarily only me and my reading of a piece that we share as a group, but how that works in concert with those around me, and how that boosts empathy, which then hopefully initiates action, right? Not just the production of empathy, which I think literature does beautifully when it does it well. But what's that next step? It's that action step that I was longing for as an artist and an educator, long before I even knew narrative medicine was a thing. And so stumble upon this theory, right, that we're still building and still trying to understand and expand upon. And I'm thinking, well, this is brilliant, because the close reading that I've spent my career doing, looking at craft, looking at the elements of a story, the sonic qualities, the sensual qualities, how something is written, not just what is written. You know, I can apply all of that to this idea of understanding myself better and understanding others and how I can help others, which is very satisfying at this stage of my career, and how I hope to sort of go beyond just the publishing of books and letting them go out into the world, and who knows what happens to them, you know? And I've sat in on a couple groups who have read the book, and have had, you know, 3 or 4 wildly different responses. Well, I thought this is what Em was doing. I thought this is what Em was doing. How could you think that? I'm reading the same thing, and I had a completely different response. And for me, as someone who, you know, sort of actively works to release the sense of control I think I have, but maybe don't have, it's a really important practice to embrace all those different readings.
Yeah.
And it's really helped, you know, as I go through these narrative medicine courses in the CPA program, to really hear people's responses to these works that we're going through, and really how wildly different. And so it gives me permission to also embrace, you know, multiple readings, and, you know, I hopefully to also hone in on my own a little bit better too, right?
Yeah, depending upon the day, the group could reconvene the next day and read exactly the same texts and derive different meanings. So it really is, the meaning making is dynamic.
Yeah.
It's dependent upon the individuals. It's dependent, I guess, upon the atmosphere that's created of acceptance, and then the dive deeper into writing about it, and
Yeah.
writing what comes up for us in the reading.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I have yet to facilitate a narrative medicine workshop. That will come later this summer for me. But as a, you know, creative writing educator, it's the most exciting thing for me as well, is to read other people's work and to see how, you know, and again, while in the creative writing space, we don't want to encourage absorbing other people's work and sort of writing through that voice, right, in the way that narrative medicine is embracing. I think that's creates brilliant freedom for a person who is not an artist, who does not come from that field, to give themselves permission to get outside of that comfort zone, right? Whatever it may be. And so I love it. I love hearing other people's work, other people's translations, right? We're all in conversation with one piece or one idea. And it's thrilling. Yeah.
It's thrilling.
I'm shopping around my second novel, which is very different. I will say, you know, maybe part of this sort of low threshold for maybe too much focus in my own writing. It's complete departure from tight little vocal cords. So it's a slightly more linear novel, longer chapters, a longer work in and of itself, that is a reimagining of the 3 fates. So the crone, the maiden, and the mother. So 3 female voices sort of experiencing contemporary life, equally sensual and focused on mental health and memory and sex and gender identity, you know, how our culture now treats people who are aging, right? So the old crone, such as she is in Greek myth, and how that old crone might be treated now, perhaps unfairly, is really part of the work. You know, and then the fertile mother figure, the woman who is the producer and the do everything, and then the young maiden who's, you know, wild and reckless and free, but also has depths that we don't always give her the time for.
Yeah.
You know, as I continue into narrative medicine, I find myself to be one of the only working artists in a lot of these groups.
Right.
And so I love sort of bringing my perspective, but I can't tell you what I've been able to absorb from people who are in vastly different fields than mine. And the way that, you know, our brains work as individuals and how we're coming together as a collective in these spaces has been really fun for me, both creatively and just on an intellectual level, to get to know people that I only ever know, you know, as a patient or as a friend, right? It's been a pleasure.